Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's a button on the bottom that says.
You guys see the recording?
Yeah, it's recording
It's
now.
recording. You got it.
Okay.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you coming out to have this conversation. So we can start with some introductions. My name is Manis. I'm one of the editors-in-chief for the Newbury Park High School Panther Prowler.
My name is Jessica, and I'm also one of the other co-editors-in-chiefs for the Newbury Park High School Panther Prowler.
Hi, my name is Prashita. I'm a page editor for the Panther Prowler.
My name is Natalie. I'm one of the editors-in-chief for the Thousand Oaks Lancer.
I'm Finn Swanson. I'm an editor for the Lancer.
Hi, I'm Molly, and I'm also an editor for the Lancer.
I'm Lindsay, and I'm editor-in-chief for the Westlake High School Arrow.
I'll try not to show favoritism. My 3 kids all are Westlake High School graduates. Full disclosure. Go on. Sorry.
And I'm Song Hee, and I'm also one of the co-editors-in-chief from the Westlake Arrow.
Great. And just so you know, when I was in high school, I was the news editor of the high school newspaper. So, and I don't remember ever interviewing political candidates or doing anything like that. So you're starting off, I'm in already. So.
Okay, perfect.
So we started off by, are you able to introduce yourself and kind of what your current occupation is?
Sure. So my name is Karen Sylvester. I'm running for the CVUSD Board of Education in Area 1. I am currently retired from being a management business consultant, but I did that many years ago. I've spent the past 18 years as a parent, leader, and parent volunteer within the various school sites as well as the district level.
And so why did you choose to run for school board, and what are some
Go on, I'm sorry.
why did you choose to run for school board, and what are some concerns you hope to address in your area?
Yeah, I'm laughing because there are days where I'm questioning that. You know, honestly, I've been involved in the schools since my oldest started kindergarten, which is in 2001. So let me just back up. So I have 3 kids. My youngest graduated Westlake High School this past June, so she's a recent grad. The older 2 are boys, and they graduated 6 years and 4 years ago. So I have been volunteering since my oldest started at Westlake Hills Elementary. I was very involved there. I was involved at Kalina Middle School, and then I was very involved at Westlake High School, both on the PTSA as well as all 3 of my kids are theater kids, so I got very involved with Westlake Theater. As I looked at it and realized a couple things. 1, my youngest was graduating, and 2, there was an opportunity with the new trustee seats or areas. There was no one in this area. And 3, so much of my life has been shaped by what I've done that, and my kids benefited so greatly from the education they received that it was like almost a call. Like I felt like I needed to give back to the district. I had the time since, you know, I was going to be an empty nester. I had the energy. I have the background. I have a whole set of business skills, which we haven't even talked about. So it just felt like I could actually make things better and I can make a difference. 20 or so years ago, my husband and I moved out to the Conejo Valley. And at the time I was working downtown, he worked in Hollywood. This was an incredibly, what's the word? It was not easy for any of us, for either one of us, but we came out here for the schools. And I think for our 3 kids, we saw the benefit and they all did well. So in terms of issues, I do recognize that not all kids do well, that there are kids who don't get the same benefits of the Conejo Valley school system. I do believe that at the end of the day, every kid, I call you kids and I'm sorry, I apologize. Every student, I will try to be better, really needs to be able to achieve their best outcomes. And what that means is education needs to be provided equitably. And that's not equally, that's equitably. So I think that's the #1 goal and that underwrites everything I do. And then 2, and you know, I've seen this with my own kids and their friends. Every student on every campus should feel comfortable, they should feel safe, they should feel welcome, they should feel celebrated. And I don't think that always happens. And I think that's a real issue. And then the third thing is, you know, we live in California. There's just not that much money. There's not very many resources devoted to education, which is a real shame. So I think being able to look at the budget and be able to advocate for funding and do creative things and look at costs is an important aspect of all this. So that's when I entered the race in February, which is pre-pandemic, that's really the way I viewed the world. And I've had cause over the past few months to say, is this still important? And what I realized with everything going on, that everything I've just mentioned has become even more important and even more difficult to achieve. Does that answer your question for the most part?
Yes. And I see, so you've had experience in business consulting as well as serving on various district advisory councils.
Mm-hmm.
So what work that you've done there has prepared you for being a trustee?
So let me just elaborate what I've done. So for the past 9 years, I've been a representative to the District Advisory Council, what is called DAC. You guys have SDAC now, but this is DAC. And it, so I would say for the first 9 years, I kind of did my thing on each of the various school sites and helped raise money and supported teachers and communicated with parents and whatnot. And what I realized pretty quickly once I started attending DAC meetings, because they were monthly, there's a representative from every school there, is what it occurred to me was that even though it's a unified school district, the challenges on the various school sites differ quite dramatically. And parent engagement and the ability to fundraise at a school like Westlake Hills is very different than at some of our Title I schools or some of the other elementary schools. So I started realizing that there were challenges that were very different outside of the schools my own kids went to. So I think just understanding that is helpful. As a DAC rep, I mean, talk about access. Every month we would have different administrators come and speak. The superintendent would come and speak, and some of the assistant supes would come. We had presentations on that teachers would give on, you know, what they're doing for Disability Awareness Week, or some of the challenges or the way they were handling inclusion or co-teaching at their various schools. So I've been educated in all things district for 9 years, to the tune of 3 hours a month for 8 or 9 months. I can't do the math, and I'm not gonna try. So I really think that knowing all that is incredibly helpful, especially given that again, I'll circle back to the pandemic and what life is like now. We need trustees who, when they get seated in the beginning of December, are up that learning curve and know what they're doing and understand all of the issues, understand the context and the history of the district, because I've seen it. I've seen 4 different superintendents. I've seen different assistant superintendents of instruction. I've seen what GATE used to look like, what it looks like now. I've seen what special education used to look like, and what parent groups and teachers and students are pushing so that it looks like what it will look like now. So I've got the context and history. I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And I think that's just been invaluable experience. In an alternate life as a business consultant. So what does that mean? I have a lot of fancy degrees. I have an MBA from Harvard. I have an undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania, which looks great on my wall. But I spent 15 years in the business world. I worked with a wide variety of organizations. And what I loved about being a consultant is I got to do a wide variety of projects. It wasn't the same old, same old. So after doing that for 15 years, you learn an approach, what I call like an approach to decision making and problem solving, which is, you know, you do your homework. I don't go into things without researching, whether it's ed code or the financial statements underlying something. You do your homework, you research it, you crunch the numbers if you have to. And then most importantly, you talk to all of the stakeholders, all of the people involved. In a business, it would be, you know, you talk to the CEO and you talk to all the workers and you talk to the customers and you talk to suppliers. In a school organization, it's a little different. You talk to students like you guys, you talk to teachers, you talk to administrators and staff, and it's kind of by listening to everybody and listening to all the viewpoints, it helps with your decisions. So again, I've sat on DAC for a while. I've worked within the school sites or volunteered within the school sites, plus I have the business skills. And then the final thing is, like, currently I'm on the Measure I Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. So even though my daughter's graduated, I still have monthly meetings there. And that's just looking at how the proceeds of the Measure I funds are being spent. So I still have my hand in that pie.
Wonderful. Out of curiosity, with Measure I, there's been a lot of talk about more funding for keeping everything sanitized when we do return to school. Is that money going to come from Measure I?
It can't.
Oh, okay.
So Measure I, when Measure I was passed, which was, I want to say 6 years ago, and it was voted on. I mean, this is something that went on the ballot. Bonds such as those in the state of California, there's some strict prohibitions or strict delineations of how that money can be used. And basically it's things like capital and infrastructure. So the STEM building at Westlake High School is one example. The library at TO High School, redoing the swimming pool at Newbury Park High School. But that's all Measure I funds. The other thing that Measure I can be used for is technology. So the way the district has decided to do that is every year, every school within the district is given about $100 per student that they can use to purchase technology. Things like cleaning supplies, that needs to come out of the general fund. That is not part of the way Measure I was written. Now, technology. So one of the good things about Measure I is after the school shut down in March, it was quickly apparent that there were kids or students who didn't have access to computers. So because of Measure I, we had an inventory of about 10,000 Chromebooks, and the district was able to give out in the first month about 4,000 of those. So when you read about like LA Unified, like some of their students never was able to log in because they didn't have the technology. So because of Measure I, they were able to give out the Chromebooks. They then realized, of course, that just having a device isn't enough, and they followed that up with hotspots. And I think one of the big things that needs to be worked on is closing the digital divide and making sure everybody has access to high-speed internet. So, but to answer your question, all of the extra costs associated with the pandemic and getting back to school, unfortunately, is going to have to come out of the general fund. And that's an extra expense.
Got it.
Yeah.
Kind of shifting topics, a lot of the candidates this year have expressed one of their top priorities to be like handling school board discussions at meetings respectfully. What are your thoughts on that? I
personally would not want to be part of any discussion where people were not speaking respectfully to each other. That is not how I operate. I don't think that's the way any organization should operate. I think you can have differing viewpoints. I think it's healthy to have differing viewpoints. I don't think any organization, whether you're a school board or a school newspaper, if everyone thinks the same way and has the same opinion, that's not good decisions and do not get made that way. So I don't believe that you want a school board with 5 people who agree on everything or who have the same background or the same approach. I do think you have to speak nicely to people. I mean, that seems so silly that I have to say, but I think we've seen examples where that's probably not the case. And I don't act that way. I would never act that way. I believe in treating everyone respectfully.
Great, thank you. Songi, you want to take it away?
Yes. So regarding what has happened in the past few months with COVID, what are your thoughts on distance learning? And do you think there are any areas of improvement for the district?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time over the past few months talking to lots of different parents. And I would say, well, I would say in the spring, it was fairly clear and uniform that nobody was particularly happy with distance learning. And I know in my own household, I had a second semester senior, so I do understand that engagement levels maybe were not going to be the same. But the decisions made back then, and I don't think they were bad decisions, but the decisions made back then to prioritize social and emotional health and not have kids worry about, you know, their grades, that pretty much had a pretty negative impact on things like attendance. There were days I'd walk into my daughter's room and she would literally be the only one in her class with maybe a teacher. So there was some problems back then. And I do think that the district has addressed the basics. You have to go to school, you have to attend. The teachers have to do live instruction, because she had some teachers who just did a video and posted the video, and therefore you didn't really have to show up at any given time. So I wholeheartedly think imposing and having some synchronous learning is absolutely critical. Having kids go to class, absolutely critical. Grading, absolutely critical. So I think all of those improvements have been made. So then the question is, all right, so everything's perfect now. This is all really new. It's new to students, it's new to the parents who are sitting next to the students, and it's new to teachers. Now you're all high school students, so my guess is you're probably pretty good at getting on Canvas by yourself and accessing your homework and uploading and whatnot. I honestly cannot imagine if I had a first grade or a third grader what that would look like. So I think the more that the schools can reach out to parents, and they've done some of it, train parents on the technology, train parents on some tools, I think that would improve distance learning tremendously. I think teacher training. I think from everything I've seen, the teachers are working really, really hard. I dropped a yard sign off at a teacher last week, and she was very, very clear that she would go back the next day. She had 2 younger kids and said she would send them back the next day. She said with remote learning, all she's doing is teaching her cohort A and cohort B. She barely has time to lesson plan or grade. So it's, I don't think this is easy on anyone, but I do think that remote learning is going to be here for a while. I hope that that the students and the families who want to go back will have the opportunity to go back, but not everybody will. So I think getting remote learning right is very, very critical. And I think the district is taking steps in the correct direction. And it's really, there's no playbook here. This is all kind of new to everybody. I mean, I'd love to hear from your perspective at a later time what you all think about remote learning and what your experiences have been. I did, just as one more side, last week or 2 weeks ago, I did sit in on an STAC meeting. And one of the topics of discussion there was, they were talking about retention. It was great. I mean, it was kind of interesting to hear. And one of the points a few of the students made was that they felt with the pace really being twice as fast as before, that they were worried that even from day to day or class to class, they were having trouble retaining the material. And then they were incredibly worried what happens when the quarter changes and they're not going to have a class for 1 quarter. So these are all really, I think, legitimate concerns.
So regarding continuing remote learning for whoever knows how long in the future, how do you feel about reopening schools at this moment?
At this moment, I fully support, there's 2 initiatives going on. One is getting vulnerable populations back on campus, which is allowed now. And I fully support that. I think for kids with IEPs, kids who are learning English, I think, and kids who receive special services, they need to get back on campus. It needs to be done safely. It needs to be done safely. I don't want to put any kid at risk. I don't want to put teacher at risk, a paraprofessional, anybody. So that's the whole small cohort, and that is, they're trying. My understanding is they're working on that, and I fully support it. The second thing I fully support is the waiver process. So I don't know what happened today, but I know the waiver was submitted Tuesday to the county, and I do support families that want their kids to go back, and these are the little kids we're talking about. The waiver just covers K through 6. So I fully support that. And once we move into the red tier, or we stay in the red tier for 2 weeks, or whatever the latest hurdles are, I would like to see a slow rollout. I don't think we open the schools on day one and everybody comes back. I think the plan is you have the littlest kids who may already be back if the waiver gets granted. You have the 6th graders come back and the 9th graders come back, and then you bring other classes back slowly. And you monitor and you put in the right protocols. That's clear. You need to keep the small class sizes, you need to take temperatures, you need to clean desks, you need to encourage the little kids to wash their hands and wear their masks. So you need to do all of it in a very healthy and safe way. But I do believe, to the extent possible, that we can get kids back on campus. I think we should. And again, I'll reiterate, recognizing that not everyone will come back, so we don't abandon remote learning by any stretch. That needs to be, we need to continue to strengthen and make sure that that's a robust alternative. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And I do know that you mentioned previously about providing technology for the students who are participating in remote learning, but how would you continue to address the issue with students having access to the necessary technology?
You know what has been one of the most interesting things that I've realized? If you're learning remotely, obviously you need a computer and you need the Wi-Fi and whatnot. But honestly, if tomorrow COVID went away and everybody went back to school full time and we weren't even doing remote, you still need a computer and access to the internet. I do believe that that is an absolute essential tool for every student, regardless of whether they're learning remote or learning in school. I think there's some initiatives at a state level. Tony Thurmond, who's the chief education guy in the state, is working hard to close the digital divide and working with private companies and providers to, because it's the access to the internet that's really part of the issue. It's not just the device. We're pretty good on devices, as I said. It's making sure that people have access to high-speed internet. The other thing, one of the students at the SDAC meeting was off camera, and someone queried him about it, and he said he didn't have a webcam. So it's not just the device, it's not just the internet access, it's getting the webcam. So I fully support money spent by the district in making sure that kids have these devices. And I think anything we could do with businesses to help defray or make it free, high-speed internet, I support fully, regardless of how we're learning.
And my final question to you is, what do you think are some things that you believe the district should be doing to help support students and teachers besides the education itself?
Well, in terms of teachers, let's start with teachers. Are you talking about just in general or now during the days of COVID?
I would say maybe more towards COVID related.
Yeah. Again, I think that training for teachers, training and professional development is key. For students, look, we're all in this. We all know that this has been, I hate using the words unprecedented times because that has now become just the most trite expression, but it is. So I think the social and emotional health of everybody really needs to be focused on. And it's nice to see the elementary schools and the middle schools, they've built that time into their day. The high schools, you guys don't have that time built in. Teachers need to mindfully provide that. One of my I mentioned briefly before, all 3 of my kids were theater kids, which is interesting to me. That was their community, that was their friends, that was half the reason they would go to school, that was their enjoyment. All of that stuff right now has been taken away. And I really, really worry about how that impacts kids and their mental health. So to the extent that the district can continue providing time for the social emotional connections, and to the extent they can publicize referrals and let families and students know where to go when they're feeling overwhelmed or anxious or stressed. I think that's partly the job of the school district. So I think if I have to say the number one thing, it would be the social and emotional piece of it and the mental health services. And, you know, again, for everybody, parents. I mean, I feel for these parents who are working parents with younger kids. I can't imagine, I mean, they need support as well. And teachers, yeah, you all need support. And school board candidates, let me tell you, we need some support as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so you said that one of the main issues you want to focus on with your platform is addressing equity issues. And there is a lot of conversation about, you know, racial equity and inclusion. How do you think that we should promote a culture of equity and inclusion on all of our school sites in the district?
So there's things that could be done at the district level. Let's start there. And we've seen the school board do some of that. Couple school board meetings ago, they adopted the resolution for racial equity. They put an equity task force together. They approved a couple more books written by Black authors. So all of that is great. As far as the resolution and the task force, I'm a firm believer that all of that's nice, but you gotta see some results coming out of it and make sure that, and I know some of the people on that task force, several people, and I think it will be a great working group, but their recommendations need to come up to the school board and the school board needs to act on it. Otherwise, it's just another task force and the resolution just becomes a piece of paper. So I think that there's definitely things at the school board level that can and should continue. As far as on the school sites, I think, you know, we talk a big game about including everybody, but I think there's ways to, I think that historically we like to think everyone, we don't see color and everyone's the same and, you know, we treat everybody the same way. But the reality is we shouldn't do that. We should celebrate our differences. We should acknowledge somebody who has a different racial background and talk to them about it. So it's an interesting story. So one of the things I do is I do alumni interviews for prospective college students for my alma mater. And I was doing this a couple years ago and a student walked in. He didn't go to school within the Conejo Valley and he was wearing a turban. And I proceeded to, I wasn't going to ask him about it because I didn't think I should, but he proceeded to tell me, he was a Sikh, he proceeded to tell me all about that. And he said he started a Sikh club at his high school. Not because there was a lot of Sikhs who wanted to be in the Sikh club, but he wanted the non-Sikh students to understand more about his culture and why he wore a turban and his food. And we had the most fascinating conversation. I know at one of our high schools has a robust Latino club. Another one was trying to get a Latino club started and apparently couldn't get an advisor. I think the more we can have clubs like that, and again, and the good thing with the Latino club, just as an aside, is now because we're all remote, they're meeting across all the campuses via Zoom. But I think to have those types of clubs and enrichment activities and having, you don't want a Latino club that's just Latino students. You want a Latino club that has everybody in it. I think that kind of stuff is absolutely wonderful. So I think just fostering that. And then the other side of it is, it seems, and I'm speaking more at a high school level, but it's true, I think, in the younger schools, a lot of what gets celebrated is academic achievement, right? Oh, here are our national merit scholars, and here's our valedictorians, and here's the winner of the spelling bee, and here's our student of the month because, you know, he's a nice kid. There's so many other ways to celebrate kids that is outside of academics, because let's be clear, for this academic stuff, it's usually the same kids. You know, celebrate kids who play on sports teams, celebrate our Sparkles cheerleaders, celebrate kids who do acts of kindness. I mean, I think different schools try that, but I think the more we can find ways to acknowledge our students that's not just academically focused, then I think that goes a long way to helping the culture on the school.
Okay, and then what do you think are some areas that the district is doing well and some areas that you hope to see improved in terms of providing equal access to opportunities regardless of race or financial status or any other factor?
I mean, I don't want to say baby. There has been incremental improvement that I've seen, and I do think the conversations have evolved over the past 18 years. It seems like a lot of it started with parents who had kids with students with disabilities, and there was a group called, still is a group called Thrive. They really started advocating for their own kids at the district level, and now we have CDAC, which is the Special Education DAC, which has become a force within the district. So I think that things are heading in the right direction. I do think that when the fact that the district went down the path of putting together an equity task force, and again, these were unanimous votes, that's a signal. Dr. Miller, they created a new position at the district office, and Dr. Miller, who oversees student support services, reports directly to the superintendent. These are all really positive signs, and it shows this is some of what the district is prioritizing. So again, improvement. Reality, it is are we doing better by all of these special populations? If you look at the California dashboard, the answer would be not really. There hasn't been significant improvement just from an education standpoint. From a college and career readiness standpoint, there's certain groups that are not doing as well. Graduation rates, suspension rates, there is definitely a lot of room for improvement in those areas. So again, I see improvement, I really do. I see encouraging signs. I see I see a couple of new books that got adopted for the high schools. There's still a long way to go, long way to go.
Okay, and then I wanted to ask specifically about the English language learner programs that we have in our district. So what are your thoughts on how these programs are being run? Any positive things, any rooms for improvement in these programs?
So I think when you're looking at things like language acquisition, one of the concerns is you have kids who are learning language at the same time they're learning curriculum. So you want to make sure that their language acquisition is not getting in the way of their curriculum attainment. That's, to me, the most important thing. So I don't have a great handle on how that's going, but that's another group where if you look at the progress, it's been incredibly incremental. Some of the issues are you don't have a tremendous number of bilingual teachers, even at the Title I schools. Some of the admin are bilingual, but not all the teachers. So if you're at a Title I school where 70% of the kids speak Spanish, shouldn't there be Spanish-speaking teachers? Again, there's been some improvement. The new principal that was just hired at Conejo Elementary is bilingual. So there is, again, there's been some hiring changes, but it's far from really being enough. And I think that's the representation aspect, and the hiring policies I think would help tremendously in that area.
Okay, thank you.
So to shift gears here, there's been a lot of discussions regarding core literature books in the English curriculum. So what is your thought process when evaluating books for core literature titles?
Oh, so you picked just the big discussion for the past few years. Okay, because when you say core lit, there was the whole issue a couple of years ago with the asterisks. We've moved past that. I have met a couple times with Diversify Your Narrative, as well as the Justice in the Classroom students, and I completely applaud their thoughts about diversifying the literature that is being taught at high school. It is, and it started a couple years ago with the part-time, I can never get the title of that book correct, Part-Time Adventures of an Indian, right?
I think it's the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. Yeah, something like that.
I've read it. I've read the book, and I can never get the title down. But anyway, it started that, and now the two books, The Underground Railroad and Between, oh man, should never do things on a Friday afternoon, Between the World and Me, both books which I've read. That's a great start. But I do agree that every grade level should include a BIPOC author. And I do believe that should go back into middle school as well. I also think that when books are, even in the elementary school level, when you're talking about books that younger kids read or being read to, I would like to see the books there also reflecting all of the various students and their backgrounds, even in elementary school. Now, in terms of how those books get selected, I think the process now, which is there's a whole series of, it starts off an English teacher recommends a book, and then it goes through a series of committees. And then it gets to the point where they do bring the book forward and have get parents' input. And I think, again, getting input from stakeholders is always a nice, important thing to do. And ultimately then the board votes on it. So it's nice to have that parent perspective, but I do believe that literature should be driven by the educators. They're the ones who, they understand the fuller context of what students are reading. They understand how they're going to guide the students through the books. Again, good idea to get some input from parents and students as well. But at the end of the day, I think it should be educator driven and then obviously approved by the school board. Did I answer your question? I think I kind of went off into a few tangents on that.
Got it. Thank you. Do you believe that a diverse set of perspectives is necessary to be represented in required core literature books for the CVUSD?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of that.
Do you believe that a diverse set of perspectives needs to be represented in the required core literature books?
Absolutely.
And how will you as a board member ensure that everyone's voice is heard when deciding these?
When deciding on the core literature books?
Yes.
Again, I think it's, I think with everything, and it starts with the teacher, but I think I applaud all of the students who call into board meetings and have public comments, and parents who call into board meetings and have public comments. So I think that's one way you get the voice of students and parents. I think all of the various DACs, the regular DAC, the SDAC, DLAC, all of them filter up to the board and have a voice, a seat at the table. I think as a trustee going to these meetings, I know as a DAC rep for the past 9 years, there was always one or two board members at the DAC meeting. When recently I've been to a CDAC meeting and an SDAC meeting, and there was at least one or two other, I'm not a trustee, there were one or two trustees at the meetings as well. So I think it's good to have the students and the parents come to the board meetings, but I think as a board trustee, you need to go out into the community and the world and go to these meetings as well.
Thank you.
Kind of on the same vein of inclusivity and curriculum, but with the California Healthy Youth Act, the CVUSD is committed to starting the health textbook selection cycle this year. What are your thoughts on including LGBTQ education in the health curriculum?
Well, first of all, if it wasn't for the pandemic, that would have been decided on this past spring, and they could have been starting to teach it this fall. Unfortunately, the pandemic kind of disrupted plans. I believe we need to be compliant with the California Healthy Youth Act, period. I know they're working on 9th grade, but we're out of compliance in 7th grade as well. And a key component of the California Healthy Youth Act is to teach kids is the right word, but to teach kids about gender, gender expression, gender identity, different types of relationships, sexual orientation, all of that needs to be included. And it needs to be included not just because it's the law of the land, but because it's the right thing to do.
On that note, how would you say that the best way for the district to support LGBTQ students, specifically transgender students, like just in the day-to-day life of going to school?
Well, the first thing is there's a law in the books that's about 5 or 6 years old. If I was really good, I would know the number, like 1266. Anyway, that guarantees if you're transgender, you can use the facilities of the gender you identify with, or you can join the sports, to anything that's segregated on the basis of gender or sex, you can join the team that you identify with. So that's the law, that period that needs to be followed. I think so much of this comes down to education. A lot of it comes down to training teachers. A lot of it comes down to having that curriculum. I mean, having the California Healthy Kids Act and being compliant with it, I think would help support students in the classroom. I think having teachers that are trained, and I think training teachers of elementary school students, starting when those kids are young. I mean, that's really when you start having the ability to teach kids acceptance and inclusion and kindness and anti-bullying and all of the stuff. I mean, I hate to say it, by the time someone's 17 or 18, it's a little tougher. But when they're 7 or 8, teaching them acceptance is so absolutely critical and important. So I think it's just doing a whole bunch of that stuff. I think it's also getting back to literature and curriculum. I think it's having LGBTQ students see themselves reflected in some of the books they read, see their families reflected. I mean, you could be a straight student. You might have 2 moms at home, or 2 dads, or a transgender mom. I mean, there's all kinds of families out there. And I think the more that students can see their particular family reflected in the stuff they read, the better. In my day, all of the books were, was, a white mom, a white dad, and 2 white kids. And the mom was always in the apron and the dad had the briefcase. And the world doesn't look like that anymore. I mean, there may be some families like that, but the world does not look like that anymore. And in our curriculum and our literature, I think it's caught up a bit. I don't think it's quite the way it was when I was in school, but I think there's still a long way to go. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. So what are your thoughts on social and emotional learning in the classroom, also known as teaching self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making?
Oh, that sounds really good. I think that this is something that teachers need to specifically embed in their teaching and embed in their curriculum. And they need the tools and the training in order to do that, because I don't think it necessarily comes naturally, or it's not, if you're teaching math, it's not embedded in that textbook. What I love about what they're doing in the pandemic is that for the middle schools and the elementary schools, they have what they call social emotional learning time. I've heard varying things about how that's working out, to be honest, and it seems like some teachers are doing a better job of it than others, but at least it's there. At least they're trying. I would love to see some time like that set aside at the high school, and I don't think that's quite happened yet. And I'd love to see, once we go back to life as normal, or as normal as possible, that type of thing continues. So, it really comes down to training the teachers, I think, and having the time. I mean, you know, in today's world and the whole race to nowhere and, you know, getting in all of the standards, it's really, really hard, I think, sometimes to sit back and have that time to reflect. I mean, I saw it with my own kids that, you know, 7 in the morning till 7 p.m. was go, go, go. And, you know, you're taking these number of classes and AP classes, and you have to have a sport and you have to do this. And it's just a crazy world. I think things need to slow down a little. So there is that time for self-reflection. There is that time to kind of take stock. I think it's critical. I do. And it makes me sad when kids are just under just such tremendous academic pressures. And I hear stories that starts sometimes in 4th, 5th grade, where kids feel if they're not in that top math class, you know, back when they give that test in 5th grade, that their entire academic career is in the toilet, and therefore it's trickled down to the younger kids. It's not just, you know, you become a junior in high school and realize, oh my gosh, it's starting earlier, and there's just so much stress and anxiety these days.
Thank you. I was also wondering what your opinion is on Conejo Valley's social emotional specialized programs, such as the self-contained classes for students with certain disabilities.
So, yeah, special education in general. Here's one of the ones where I've seen this evolve over the years. It clearly, at a lot of the schools, the special ed students were over there. They were kind of off to the side. It was considered a school within a school. No one thinks that that's a good thing anymore. And what parents and students want is they want to be included in the general population to the extent possible. And there's laws about that. There's laws about offering the least restrictive environment to students. So the days where the specialized classroom is off to the side of the school and you never see these kids, that is changing a bit. That said, in the disability world, there's quite a spectrum, and there are students and children who really need so many resources that they probably can't function in some of the general ed classes. But to the extent that they could find some time in the day to work with general ed students, I think that the more the better. In the high schools, and I think even in the elementary schools and middle schools, they have what they call co-teaching sections. So I don't know if any of you have been in any of those, but it combines some special education students with general education students and 2 teachers. So you have the special education teacher who is been trained in how to teach, kind of the methods of teaching, and then you have the general education teacher who's been taught in actually the subject matter. And if you think about it, for any student, having those 2 types of teachers in a section would be just tremendous. Because not everybody, even if you're a general ed student, not every kid learns the same way. There's kind of diversity there. So in my opinion, the more that we can have inclusion of our special ed population in with the classes, the better. And there's been, like, one example is like at Maple Elementary School, they actually moved one of these SEI classrooms closer to the rest of the school so the kids all played together on the playground. Just doing that small thing really changed the ways a lot of the kids viewed each other. So I do recognize there's a need sometimes for having some of these specialized classrooms, but to the extent that we can start including more and more and look, it benefits everybody. I mean, this is the 21st century, and learning to work with people with different abilities and backgrounds is absolutely key. So what is that? Is that a cat? I just see a tail wiggling around, sorry.
I just have a quick thing, just jumping back a little bit to when you mentioned students with anxiety, with grades. Do you have any ideas of programs CVUSD could implement, or thoughts on the programs they have to help students who are experiencing anxiety in that way?
There's a couple things. So one is, and I've seen this, a lot of high school students feel they need to take 7, 8 AP classes. They work constantly, they get no sleep. They can't really do much outside of that. I don't think that's particularly healthy. But there's this race to take as many AP classes and get many A's in your AP classes. So one of the things that Oak Park Unified School District has done, and they did it in collaboration, I believe, with Stanford University, was to say, we are going to limit the number of AP classes a student can take. We're going to look at what your overall schedule looks like, and if you're a baseball player and you have X number of hours of baseball practice a day, we're going to take that into account, and you are not going to be allowed to take more than X number of AP classes. And what that does is colleges, when you're applying, colleges know that if you're at Oak Park High School, you can't take 8 AP classes. So there's no disadvantage of only taking 2 or 3. So I don't know. I know they're doing this. I don't know the results. There was a little bit of an outcry from the parents at the beginning, but my understanding was that it's been positive. I would like to at least explore that possibility. I can't say it's the answer, but I would like to explore it, because I don't want to throw Westlake High School under the bus, but there is definitely a real culture there of taking a lot of AP classes, and it's too much. I mean, we're talking about time for self-reflection. There is no time for self-reflection if you're taking a whole load of courses and you're trying to do some co-curriculars or extracurricular activities, and or possibly even hold a job. So I think we need to do that. I think a lot of that is parent education, a lot of that. So that's just one thing that I keep coming back to.
So regarding budget, what would be your top priority for district spending, and do you think the district could better allocate its funds?
So I don't, as far as district spending in programming, not a dollar can be spent in the budget that is not attached to an LCAP goal. Do you know what the LCAP goals are? Local control and accountability. So every single program, every single dollar spent has to tie back to one of the 4 goals, or more than one of the goals. And so one way you prioritize it is to make sure of that. But I think what's more important than on a piece of paper saying, this program ties back to this goal, is to make sure that that you can measure the results of the program. And you can go back and say, okay, we spent all this money on We the People. Did it do what we thought it would? Is this a good use of funds? And I'm just picking on We the People. I love We the People. I don't want to say that. So it's not just, it's not just assigning a goal to a program. It is actually measuring the effectiveness of that program. Does that make sense? And I don't know. I don't know how well that's going on. I know that in the past year or two, the budget committee is now called the Budget LCAP Committee. So they are trying to more mindfully do that. But in my mind, if you can't measure the effectiveness of spending a dollar, that's a problem. Especially in a world where you don't have infinite money, or a lot of money, or much money.
Thank you. And one more thing, how will you address the funds considering when we potentially do reopen schools, there's going to be a certain budget necessary for custodial services and cleaning supplies? How do you address funding that?
So a couple of things. One is, it is clear that there's going to be more costs in the district due to COVID when we reopen. Technology platforms, continued training, janitorial costs, ventilation, cleaning supplies, hand sanitizer, all of that stuff will cost money. So the first thing is, I do believe that as a school district, we need to really advocate at the state level as well as at the federal level for money, period. This is unprecedented times. So I wouldn't use it, but it really is. So we need as much money as we can get. So that's absolutely critical. We all know, I'm sure we all know, that California is ranked very close to the bottom in terms of spending per capita, as well as things like the number of counselors per student. So that's just abysmal. So I think as a school board trustee, advocating for as much funding as possible is absolutely critical. I do think, though, that we need to make sure that in our own house that we manage our costs, and goes back to the LCAP and the program costs, and make sure that every dollar we're spending is effective and that the programs we're spending it on are effective. I think we need to make sure that the way we're organized and operate is efficient. And I do believe that any savings or potential cost savings should be kept as far away from students and classrooms as possible. So it's looking at overhead and such outside of the student and the classroom. And then I think as far as money, you know, there's always a focus on saving money, you know, cutting costs, getting the state and federal government to give us more money. The other way to increase the money you get, or the revenue, is to increase your enrollment. And that's a better way often of doing it than cutting costs. And in the past, I don't know how long it's been going on, 5-10 years, our enrollment has been declining. And it's not a function of Conejo Valley, it's a function of the state of California. The birth rates are declining, people are holding off having kids. If you look at Thousand Oaks in particular, the population is aging, and they're aging in place. In other words, people like it here, they want to stay here. When they get older, they don't want to move out, and therefore the housing stock, there's less of it, there's less supply, and young families with kids are finding it hard to move in. So all of that has led to a decline in enrollment in our schools. And when you lose one kid, you lose the money. You know, we're paid, the way we get money from the state is on a per student basis. So if you lose a student, you lose the funding from the state, but you don't lose all the costs associated with that one student. In other words, I use the simple example, it costs as much to run a school bus with 5 kids on it than it does to run a school bus with 20 kids on it. So you lose some of the costs, maybe you need one less textbook, but you don't lose all the costs. So to the extent that you can improve revenue and bring kids in, then I think you're in a much better shape than trying to cut costs. So how do you improve revenue? One is any student that's supposed to go to your schools, you retain them or you attract them. You advertise all the great things that we do. We have a great anatomy program at Westlake High School. We have Century Academy, which is a hybrid academy. Newbury Park High School has a whole slew of career and technical education classes. We have an IB program at Newbury Park High School. The more we can advertise and promote all of the great things we do to keep kids in the district and to, quite frankly, attract kids from outside the district, the better we are. We can convert more of our elementary schools to magnet schools. It's a great way to rebrand a school. I talked earlier about Title I schools where the predominant language is Spanish. Turn them into a dual immersion magnet school. So many parents of English-speaking kids want their kids to learn another language. That's one great way of rebranding and attracting in. So the more students we can get in, homeschooling is another opportunity. Up until this year, there was, 20 kids that went through the district in terms of our own homeschooling program. Because of the pandemic, a lot of parents decided to go that route. There's now several hundred kids in the SHINE program. Get remote learning right. If we could do remote learning really, really well, we talked earlier about there's no great playbook. That's another way you keep kids in the district and you attract kids from outside the district. So again, you want to advocate for funding from the state and the government, because I do think education is underfunded and needs to be more fully funded. You do your part and you cut the costs far away from students in classrooms as you possibly can, and then you try to push that top line revenue number as best you can. So that was a very long answer to your question. I'm very sorry.
Thank you.
So since students do make up a huge portion of our district, what is your position on lowering the voting age?
That's an interesting one. I do believe, number one, the one thing they're looking at is lowering the age for the primary. So if you're going to be, so my daughter is a good example. She turned 18 in April, so she couldn't vote in the primary, but she can vote in the general election. So I think as long as you're 18 by the general election, being able to vote in the primary, and she better vote for me, but that's a completely different story. It would be very easy for me to say, I think we should lower the voting age. I don't know enough about it. What I do wish is even 18-year-olds, they tend not to vote. I think, I don't think that if you're 16 or 17, I do believe that if you're involved, like obviously all of you are, then you have the wherewithal to vote. What I worry about are the 18 to 24-year-olds who don't vote. So I don't want to give a pat answer because I don't know enough about it, to be honest. Okay.
In terms of like the school board election, something I've personally found interesting is like people that live here and don't have kids in the district vote in the school board election, obviously, but the students don't really have a say. What are your thoughts on that?
The students having a say on the school board election?
Yeah, like not even necessarily like voting, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on the students having a little more voice in that?
Well, I guess that would go, at the end of the day is an election. So if I have to retread my last answer, it would be wonderful if you can get 16 or 17-year-olds to vote for local politics. And I would say you guys are probably way more educated in voting in the school board election than probably the average citizen in Westlake who's going to show up and maybe like my name or not like my name and, vote on that basis. I think that doing what you're doing here, this is a one-way conversation. You're asking me questions and I'm talking rather endlessly, I think. I'm sorry. The more input I can get from you guys to me, so I went to the SDAC meeting, the better of a trustee I can be, if that makes sense. So I don't have a great answer on this one in terms of the voting age. I don't, and I will do my research and understand what the arguments are. Most of the students I've come into contact with, you guys, the diversify our narrative people, honestly, you guys are much better spoken, well-educated, and knowledgeable at the issues than a lot of the parents I've come across in my meet and greets. So if I had to pick between having an informed 16-year-old make a decision versus a 65-year-old who has really no idea what is going on, then obviously I think you guys would make a better choice. That's as much as I can say at this point. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you have any final thoughts or anything to add to this interview?
You guys are tough. I want to reiterate what I just said, and I do mean that. I would love it if we could have another conversation where you guys tell me what you think, how you see distance learning going, what you think about the social emotional aspect to school. Like, how are you finding it? Like, how are you getting through this pandemic? Or how, what I talked about with some of the academic stresses and pressures. I would love it to be a two-way street. So that is an invitation. Reach out. I'm happy to, we can stay on and we can stop recording and we can talk. But I really, 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 truly want the input of students, all students. So I've had a few meet and greets where students have shown up, and it's always been fascinating to me. And I don't have a student right now, so I don't even have that like, oh, can I go look at Canvas type of thing. So the more input I can get from you guys, the better. And if some of my answers don't make sense, I am happy to give a more abbreviated version. I'm not really good at the quick soundbite. I apologize.
No, long answers are great. They give us a lot to work with.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. The forums have been interesting because they give you a minute to respond. So yeah, I had the Thrive forum was a couple days ago, and it was 1 minute. You can tell I'm not very good on the 1 minute responses. I guess I know a lot. I've learned a lot. I'm open to learning more, and I'm trying to just sort of get it all out there. So I appreciate all of the time that you guys are doing. I am in awe of student journalists who are doing this and not just, you know, covering what's going on in the school. And I do think that the school board election is critical for everybody and particularly critical for students. So I'm going to research why a 16-year-old can't vote. Like, what's the arguments? Because I don't know. It does bother me that young people don't vote. That is, and I'm sure when you guys turn 18, you will, but in general, they don't. So that's, and you know what, honestly, it bothers me when people don't vote in general. What's the usual rate? It's like 50% of the population who are registered voters actually show up. I mean, right? In some elections, it's 30.
It's worse than any first world country. We have 54% in general election of 2016.
Yeah, that's what I thought, was about half. That is, I love to vote. I love to go to the polls and vote. My husband and I have that debate. He's like, it's so much better. You could sit here and you could research things, but I love going to the polls. I love exercising my right to vote. I've loved it from the very first election I voted in, and I'm not going to tell you what year that was. So, but I don't understand people who don't vote. I truly don't. And so I appreciate the question about why not lower the voting age to people who really do want to vote. So yeah, we'll see. Well, I'm hopeful this election it'll be higher than 54%. Maybe we'll talk about that in another couple months. I don't know. I don't know. Is there anything else I can tell you?
I think that's all we have. That's all we planned on asking you. Sorry, that lasted more than the 45 minutes.